Venice, October 7, 1987. The Orient Express pulls out at dusk, bound for Vienna, carrying diplomats, tourists, and one man who believes he is invisible. Colonel Alexei Sokolov of Soviet military intelligence travels under the name Hans Mueller, protected by a first-class sleeper and the promise of neutral Austria. Before 03:15 hours, somewhere between the tunnels of the Brenner Pass, 4 strangers close in. A honeymoon couple, an elderly Oxford professor, a railway safety inspector, 1 syringe of succinylcholine. By sunrise, Vienna will record a heart attack. The Cold War will record something else entirely. This is the story of how MI6 hunted a KGB officer aboard a luxury train to Vienna. Colonel Alexei Sokolov was born in 1943 outside Smolensk, into a country rebuilt on secrecy. The son of a railway logistics officer, he grew up watching supply trains move west toward occupied territories, learning early that infrastructure was the skeleton beneath any military operation. By age 22, Sokolov had secured admission to the GRU's Technical Intelligence Directorate, where he specialized in something the West called critical node analysis, identifying the transit points, power substations, and communication hubs that NATO depended on but rarely defended. By the late 1970s, Sokolov had become one of Moscow's most effective infrastructure specialists. His defining skill was operational invisibility. Unlike officers who cultivated sources or ran elaborate surveillance networks, Sokolov moved through Western Europe like a surveyor, cataloging vulnerabilities in railway junctions, energy grids, and border crossings. Associates described him as methodical, never impulsive. He traveled under commercial cover, submitted expense reports, and never once triggered a security flag. This capacity to operate in plain sight made him strategically invaluable to Soviet war planning. But by 1986, something shifted. Intelligence intercepts suggested Sokolov had begun selling partial targeting data to a Middle Eastern intermediary while maintaining his GRU position. The ambiguity was deliberate. He wasn't fully defecting. That would have meant resettlement, protection, and loss of access. Instead, he was hedging, trading fragments of intelligence for financial security while keeping Moscow's trust intact. To the Soviets, this made him a liability. To the British, he represented something worse. A man with knowledge of sleeper cells embedded across Western Europe, who might auction that information to the highest bidder. MI6's assessment in early 1987 concluded that Sokolov carried detailed knowledge of GRU logistics officers positioned in Italy, Germany, and Austria. These weren't field agents running sources. They were the invisible infrastructure. Men who managed safe houses, coordinated communications, and maintained the networks that would activate if Cold War tension ever escalated into actual conflict. If Sokolov defected fully or sold that information, the entire Western European support structure would need to be dismantled and rebuilt. The cost would be measured in years and operational paralysis. In August 1987, Signals Intelligence intercepted confirmation that Sokolov planned to travel from Venice to Vienna in early October. The route mattered. He had chosen the Venice-Vienna Orient Express, a luxury service that moved slowly through neutral territory. No extradition treaties, no easy surveillance. For a man who understood infrastructure, the train felt like armor. A moving space governed by hospitality rather than security, threading through countries where British intelligence operated under severe restrictions. By September, MI6 had determined that conventional options wouldn't work. Kidnapping risked exposure at border crossings, where Austrian and Italian police maintained customs presence. A shooting would violate Austrian neutrality and trigger diplomatic retaliation. poisoning. In a hotel invited forensic scrutiny and potential witness testimony. The train solved all three problems, but introduced new ones. Constant staff presence, shared corridors, limited privacy, and the impossibility of escape once committed. British intelligence doctrine in the late Cold War favored what internal documents called deniable neutralization, actions that removed threats without creating martyrs or diplomatic explosions. The strategy's logic was straightforward. If an operation could be attributed, it had failed. The goal wasn't just elimination, but operational invisibility. The target would vanish, authorities would investigate, and the trail would end in medical ambiguity or bureaucratic confusion. No trials, no headlines, no retaliation. The obstacles were severe. The Orient Express employed a rotating staff of conductors, porters, and dining car attendants who moved through cabins on predictable schedules. Passengers shared corridors, and sounds traveled through thin walls. The train passed through multiple jurisdictions, each with different investigative protocols. Any misstep would create evidence, and evidence would unravel the operation backward to London. Despite these challenges, planners identified a critical vulnerability. The train's route included a 70-minute stretch through the Brenner Pass tunnels, where radio contact dropped to zero and exterior noise masked interior sounds. The vibration from track joints would obscure movement. Staff schedules placed conductors at opposite ends of the train during that window. If the timing aligned, the tunnels offered a brief operational space, isolated, loud, and invisible. The trigger came on October 5, 1987, when MI6 intercepted final confirmation that Sokolov carried microfilm identifying GRU logistics officers in Italy and Germany. The intelligence came from a source inside Soviet diplomatic communications, codenamed Archway. The microfilm wasn't hidden in elaborate concealment. Sokolov kept it in a document sleeve inside his briefcase, betting that Austrian customs wouldn't search a first-class passenger traveling under commercial cover. That confidence was his vulnerability. Within 48 hours, all elements would be in position. But first, the team needed to be assembled without leaving a pattern that counterintelligence could later trace. During the planning phase, the operations lead coordinator experienced what internal assessments later called operational drift, the psychological tension that emerges when theoretical planning confronts human consequence. The coordinator, a veteran of Northern Ireland surveillance operations, had spent 2 decades tracking targets but rarely authorizing terminal action. In a classified debrief conducted 3 months after the operation, the coordinator described the moment the authorization came through from the Joint Intelligence Committee. The order was clinical, formatted as Directive Palladium, line, numbered JIE-87-224. It specified the target, the method, and the acceptable risk threshold. What it didn't specify was how to reconcile the bureaucratic language with the fact that 4 people would board a train to stop a man's heart. The coordinator later told debriefers that the strangest part was the normality of the planning meetings. Teams discussed train schedules, compartment configurations, and surveillance camera blind spots the same way logistics officers plan supply deliveries. Someone brought coffee. Someone made a joke about Orient Express ticket prices. The operation became a problem to solve rather than a life to end. In the assessment that followed, psychologists noted this as adaptive compartmentalization, necessary for execution, dangerous for long-term psychological health. But the mission continued. Intercepted communications from September 1987 reveal Sokolov discussing his daughter's upcoming university entrance exams. The intercept came from a phone tap on a GRU administrative line in Rome. where Sokolov had stopped for 3 days before continuing to Venice. Analysts noted nothing operationally relevant in the conversation. Sokolov's daughter, Elena, was applying to study economics at Moscow State University. He promised to bring her a music box from Vienna, something she'd wanted since childhood. When the train reached Vienna and Sokolov's body was discovered, the music box was found in his luggage, still wrapped. It was logged as personal effects and returned to his family 6 weeks later. By October 6, 1987, the operation entered its execution phase. Sokolov boarded the Venice-Vienna Orient Express at 2100 hours, checking into cabin 7, car 342. The window was 13 hours. After that, the train would arrive in Vienna, and Sokolov would disappear behind diplomatic channels. The operation was compartmentalized under the internal code name Palladium Line, a designation drawn from the rail industry, term for protected routing. 4 operatives, each selected for specific skills and none knowing the full operational scope, received activation orders between September 28th and October 3rd. The team structure mirrored the train itself, distributed, quiet, and dependent on timing rather than direct communication. Operative A and Operative B were designated as the approach team. Both were fluent in Italian and German, with operational histories in close quarters work. Their cover identities as newlyweds were built 3 months ahead of activation. Passports were issued under the names David and Catherine Wright, British nationals with entry stamps from a 2-week honeymoon in Dubrovnik. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, and even a staged photograph at a Croatian beach resort were generated to support the legend. The couple booked cabin 4, car 342, 3 compartments down from Sokolov's position. Operative C adopted the identity of Professor Edward Hale, an Oxford historian specializing in European railway development. The legend was anchored in reality. A real symposium on Alpine rail engineering was scheduled in Innsbruck for October 9th, and Hale's registration was genuine. His cover allowed freedom of movement through the train, as staff and passengers expected academics to wander, take notes, and ask questions about the train's history. His cabin was in car 341, providing positional separation from the primary team. Operative D, embedded as a railway safety inspector under Directive OBB-17, a real Austrian Federal Railways protocol that allowed inspectors to board international services for compliance checks. The role gave him access to staff areas, maintenance logs, and the freedom to move without suspicion. He boarded at Verona, 6 hours before the operation's execution window, and carried credentials that even conductors couldn't challenge. Equipment was minimal by design. Carrying weapons or explosives across multiple borders risked detection. Instead, the team relied on items that could pass inspection. A lockpick cut to DIN 18252 standard, designed to manipulate European sleeper car locks. A palm-sized camera jammer calibrated to disrupt corridor CCTV without triggering alarm protocols, and a preloaded syringe containing 40 milligrams of succinylcholine, a paralytic agent used in surgical anesthesia that metabolizes rapidly and leaves minimal forensic trace. The syringe was the operation's technical centerpiece. Succinylcholine induces flaccid paralysis by blocking neuromuscular transmission, stopping respiratory function within 90 seconds. Death follows from asphyxiation as the diaphragm ceases to function. The compound breaks down into succinic acid and choline, both naturally occurring in the body, making post-mortem detection extremely difficult unless investigators specifically test for it within hours. In an elderly man or someone with cardiovascular history, the cause of death would appear to be cardiac arrest. Sokolov was 54, a smoker, and had documented hypertension. His medical profile made the cover plausible. The The communication system was entirely passive. No radios, no phones. Timing was coordinated through the train's published schedule and pre-agreed visual markers. If Operative D placed his briefcase on the corridor window ledge near Car 342's entrance, the signal meant the execution window was open. If the briefcase was absent, the operation was aborted. This eliminated the need for verbal coordination and reduced the chance of interception. Escape routes were staggered by design. Each operative held tickets to different destinations beyond Vienna. Operative A and B to Prague, Operative C to Munich, Operative D to Salzburg. The separation prevented pattern recognition if Austrian or Soviet intelligence later reconstructed passenger manifests. No two operatives would appear connected. The planning consumed 6 weeks. By October 6th, all documentation had been authenticated. Equipment had been tested in replicated train compartments at a facility outside London. And each operative had memorized their individual task sequence without knowing how it connected to the broader plan. The team had 11 hours before the execution window opened. October 7th, 1987. At 19:30 hours, the Venice-Vienna Orient Express departed Santa Lucia station. The train carried 83 passengers across 12 sleeping cars, moving northeast toward the Austrian border at an average speed of 70 kilometers per hour. Sokolov dined alone in the restaurant car at 2000 hours, ordering veal and a half bottle of Austrian white wine. Staff later described him as polite but quiet, speaking German with a slight accent they couldn't place. Operative A and B conducted first contact at 2200 hours. The approach was indirect, confirming Sokolov's compartment number by observing his dinner reservation card, which conductors placed on cabin doors too. Coordinate meal service. Cabin 7, Car 342, confirmed. The couple spent the next hour establishing behavioral patterns, walking the corridor twice under the pretense of finding the bar car, timing conductor rounds, and mapping camera positions. At 22:40 hours, Operative C tested the camera jammer near the washroom in Car 342. The device, no larger than a cigarette case, emitted a targeted radio frequency pulse that caused the corridor camera to blink offline for 6 seconds before recovering. The recovery was critical. A sustained blackout would trigger staff investigation, but brief interruptions matched the pattern of electrical fluctuations common on older rail systems. The test confirmed functionality. The jammer would work when needed. Complications emerged at 23:15 hours. A delayed freight crossing at the Italian-Austrian border pushed the train's schedule back 12 minutes. The delay compressed the operational window inside the Brenner tunnels from 70 minutes to 58. The team had no way to communicate the change except through adherence to the visual signal protocol. Operative D would need to adjust his timing to account for the new schedule. At 0100 hours, a conductor lingered near Car 342 longer than expected, conducting a manual ticket inspection for passengers boarding at intermediate stops. Operative D intercepted him in the forward corridor with a fabricated brake pressure report, citing anomalous readings on Car 338's pneumatic system. The conductor, obligated to investigate potential safety issues, moved forward to inspect the equipment, clearing the corridor for the next phase. Over the next 90 minutes, the train climbed into the Alps. Outside, temperatures dropped to 4 degrees Celsius. Passengers retired to their cabins. Corridor foot traffic ceased. By 0230 hours, only 2 people remained visible in Car 342's hallway. A late-night smoker in cabin 11 and Operative B returning from the washroom. The execution window opened as the train entered the Brenner Pass tunnels at 0300 hours. The transition was audible, a sudden drop in exterior noise replaced by the hollow echo of confined space. Track vibration increased. Radio contact with Austrian rail control dropped to 0. The train was effectively isolated. At 0300 hours, Operative D placed his briefcase on the corridor window ledge. The signal was live. The operation was authorized. 0310 hours. Operative C moved to the forward end of car 342, positioning himself near the vestibule door where he could observe both the corridor and the conductor's station. His role was containment. If staff appeared, he would create a distraction, buying the approach team 30 additional seconds. 0312 hours. Operative A and B entered the corridor. They moved without hesitation, their body language matching the casual rhythm of passengers navigating a moving train. Operative A carried a small leather folder, ostensibly a travel document case, actually concealing the lockpick and syringe. Operative B walked 2 steps behind, hands empty, eyes tracking the corridor's length. At 0314 hours, they reached cabin 7. Operative A knelt as if tying a shoe, positioning the lockpick against the compartment's locking mechanism. The DIN 18252 standard used by European sleeper cars featured a simple pin tumbler design, vulnerable to bypass if you understood the internal geometry. The lock disengaged in 8 seconds. The door opened inward, silent on its hinges. Inside, Sokolov slept on his back, his breathing steady. The compartment was dark except for ambient light from the corridor. His passport sat on the nightstand beside a half-empty glass of water. The briefcase, the one carrying the microfilm, rested on the floor beneath the fold-down desk. He wore a white undershirt and dark trousers. His jacket hung on the cabin's single hook. Operative A lifted the syringe. Operative B closed the door behind them, reducing corridor visibility to 0. Outside, Operative C activated the camera jammer. The corridor camera blinked offline. The injection site was the right carotid artery, a location that allowed rapid systemic distribution while minimizing visible trauma. Operative A's training included 72 hours of medical instruction focused on vascular access and paralytic agents. The needle entered cleanly. 40 milligrams of succinylcholine entered Sokolov's bloodstream. The paralytic effect began within 20 seconds. Sokolov's eyes opened, but his body didn't respond. Succinylcholine blocks the neuromuscular junction. The brain sends signals to move, but the muscles cannot contract. His mouth opened slightly. No sound emerged. His respiratory muscles ceased functioning 40 seconds after injection. Brain death followed within 2 minutes as oxygen deprivation became irreversible. There was no struggle, no noise. The autonomic panic response, elevated heart rate, adrenaline release, occurred internally, invisible to external observation. By 0317 hours, Sokolov's heart had stopped. Operative A repositioned the body, ensuring it lay naturally on the bed. The bedding was smoothed to eliminate signs of disturbance. The glass of water was moved closer to the bed's edge, suggesting Sokolov had been drinking before sleep. The passport remained on the nightstand. The briefcase remained untouched. Retrieving it would create investigative questions, and the primary objective was elimination, not intelligence recovery. By 0319 hours, the door was locked again from the outside. Operative A and B separated immediately, moving in opposite directions through the corridor. Operative C deactivated the jammer. The camera resumed normal function. Total time inside the cabin, 5 minutes, 12 seconds. The train exited the Brenner tunnels at 0342 hours. Passengers slept. Staff prepared morning service. Nothing appeared disrupted. Each operative exited at separate stations over the next 6 hours. Operative D disembarked at Innsbruck at 0500 hours, his role as railway inspector complete. Operative C departed at Salzburg at 0630 hours, citing an early meeting for the rail symposium. Operative A and B remained until Vienna, but separated on the platform, each taking different taxis to different hotels before continuing to Prague on different trains. No one spoke. No one looked back. The operation had executed exactly as planned. Sokolov's body was discovered at Wien Westbahnhof at 0810 hours when a steward entered cabin 7 to prepare for arrival. The steward found him lying peacefully, eyes closed, no signs of trauma. A rapid response medical team arrived within 12 minutes. Preliminary assessment suggested cardiac arrest. The body was removed to Vienna General Hospital for examination. Austrian police conducted a standard investigation. The passport identified the deceased as Hans Mueller, Austrian national, employed as a textile importer. The briefcase contained business correspondence, fabric samples, and a document sleeve with what appeared to be product specifications. Investigators found no valuables missing, no signs of forced entry, and no evidence of foul play. The cabin's lock showed no tampering. Staff reported nothing unusual during the journey. The autopsy, conducted on October 8th, recorded the cause of death as acute myocardial infarction, heart attack. Sokolov's medical history supported the conclusion. He was a smoker with documented hypertension and a family history of cardiovascular disease. Toxicology screening tested for common poisons and narcotics, but not for paralytic agents, which required specific testing protocols that weren't standard in sudden death cases. The file was closed within 72 hours. Privately, Moscow suspected betrayal, but found no evidence. The GRU conducted its own investigation, interviewing contacts in Venice and Vienna, searching for signs of surveillance or operational activity. Every lead ended in administrative dead ends. Hotel staff who remembered nothing unusual, ticket agents who processed routine transactions, border officials who stamped passports without incident. The sophistication suggested state-level involvement, but sophistication wasn't proof. The Soviet response was measured. No formal accusations, no diplomatic protests. The denials were transparent to those in the intelligence community. Everyone understood what had likely occurred. But transparency wasn't the point. Acknowledging the operation would confirm Sokolov's intelligence value and invite reciprocal action. Silence preserved strategic ambiguity. London gained what it needed: elimination of a threat without diplomatic consequence. The microfilm was never recovered, but neither was it sold. Sokolov's knowledge died with him. Venice-Vienna GRU logistics network in Western Europe remained intact, but its vulnerability had been demonstrated. British intelligence assessed that Moscow would now assume their European infrastructure was compromised, forcing a costly reconstruction even without knowing specific details. The cost was measured differently depending on perspective. Diplomatically, the operation left no footprint. No relations were damaged because no attribution was possible. Operationally, the success established a precedent. Trains, once considered neutral transit spaces, were now recognized as operational environments where deniable action could occur. The human cost was confined to one man and the 4 operatives who carried out the mission. For Sokolov's family, the death appeared natural. His daughter received the music box from Vienna along with his personal effects. She never knew that her father's final journey ended not from cardiac failure, but from calculated intervention. Whether that ignorance was mercy or tragedy depends on how you weigh truth against grief. For the operatives, the consequences unfolded over years. Psychological assessments conducted in the decade following Palladium line showed varying degrees of adaptation. Operative C left fieldwork within 2 years, citing personal reasons, and transitioned to analytical roles. Operative D continued operational deployment, but required ongoing counseling for what internal documents described as mission integration difficulties. Operative A and B remained active, but reported recurring intrusive thoughts about the moment Sokolov's eyes opened. The recognition that something was happening, but the paralysis that prevented response. The calculation MI6 made was that Sokolov's elimination prevented greater harm. His knowledge of GRU logistics networks could have enabled sabotage operations across Western Europe, targeting rail junctions, power grids, and communications hubs that civilian populations depended on. If Cold War tensions had escalated, and in 1987 the possibility felt real, those networks would have activated. By removing Sokolov, British intelligence disrupted planning cycles and forced Soviet intelligence to rebuild infrastructure from scratch. Whether this assessment proved correct remains debatable. The Cold War ended without the escalation MI6 feared. The GRU networks Sokolov knew about were never activated. The sabotage plans remained theoretical. From that perspective, Sokolov died for a threat that never materialized. From another perspective, the threat never materialized because operations like Palladium line removed key enablers before conflicts could escalate. The moral question is this: was Sokolov a traitor selling secrets, or a pragmatist navigating impossible loyalties in a world where nations played for stakes beyond individual lives? Defenders of the operation argue he made choices that positioned him as a strategic threat, and intelligence services exist to neutralize threats before they manifest. Critics argue he was executed without trial, without defense, and without the legal protections that separate justice from assassination. The paradox cuts deeper. If you accept that states have the right to act in self-defense, does that right extend to killing individuals who haven't yet committed violence, but possess the knowledge to enable it? If you reject that logic, how do you prevent catastrophic harm when threats operate beneath the threshold of criminal law? Sokolov never planted a bomb or pulled a trigger, but his knowledge made bombs and triggers possible. The answer reveals more about your worldview than about Sokolov. If you believe security requires difficult choices made in silence, Palladium line was necessary. If you believe justice requires transparency and accountability, it was murder disguised as strategy. What's your take on the line between preemptive defense and state-sanctioned killing? Was MI6 justified in eliminating a man based on knowledge he possessed, rather than actions he committed? And if you were the operative standing in that cabin at 03:14 hours, syringe in hand, watching a sleeping man who would never wake, could you have done it? Drop your perspective in the comments. If this story made you reconsider where the boundaries of national security should be drawn, hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to think harder about what states do in our names when no one is watching.